Welcome everyone to this special follow-up video from ProtectX3. I'm Roger Edwards, the Marketing Director of Protection Review, and I'm joined today by Graham Newitt from The Data Company. Welcome, Graham.
Hi, Roger.
Great to have you here, Graham. Now, ProtectX3 covered a lot of topics. We looked at Brexit, we looked at home working, we looked at evolving underwriting, and there was an overwhelming theme about the language we use in the protection market. And we're going to talk a little bit about those today and maybe dig a little bit deeper into those subjects. But maybe before we start, give everybody a little bit of background about yourself. I know you're a familiar face in the protection industry, but perhaps not everybody knows you, and a bit of background about the data company as well.
Okay, thanks, Roger. Yes, I've been around for too long, but had very enjoyable spells with kind of major providers like what's now Aviva and Legal & General, kind of running strategic change in those businesses in both the protection and wealth sectors. But the protection industry has always been a particular place close to my heart. And then for the last 10 or so years, I did a lot of consulting work, again, really working mainly with FTSE 100 companies, helping them shape their propositions or deal with particular issues they had. I had some fun getting Scottish Widows back into the IFA protection market a few years ago. And now I'm kind of gently moving towards retirement, although it doesn't feel that way, and have a more portfolio career where I help a number of businesses. And I guess that takes me on to the data company. In the last 20 years or so, all I've done really has been driving change enabled by technology. It's played such an important part in being able to alter the kind of things that we can do. And in this sort of part of my career, you know, you can reflect back on the problems that never quite got solved, or you can look for new ways to solve the problems that are around. And technology is such a key part of that. And the guys at the data company were, for me, like that Remington moment. You know, I liked it so much I bought it. And they've just got a great range of people there with some real skills, a passion for doing things differently, and the kind of infrastructure you need to help organisations deliver things into the market, be that understanding how they can use their data better, drive better customer experiences, or trying to plug gaps in the infrastructures that they have, you know, so that two systems can talk better together or customers can work with them digitally. So it's really interesting business to be with, and great to see them doing so many things.
Yeah, and I guess every business development starts with a diagnosis phase, doesn't it? And that diagnosis is often data-driven, whether that data comes from research or whether it comes from existing setups within companies and how things have been done. Now, at ProtectX, obviously, this is the third ProtectX that Protection Review has run. Quite a popular format in the pandemic lineup. Quite fast moving. 7 speakers talking for 7 minutes, and then a panel debate afterwards. What was the standout topic for you, Graham, at ProtectX3, if indeed there was a standout topic?
In a way, it made me feel quite old, because people were grappling with things that I've grappled with throughout my career. But I came away really impressed by people trying to think about how to build those conversations with customers. What were the sort of products and when should you sell them? And even down to how you actually calculate how much cover people need at what stage in their life. So I thought all 7 actually were really interesting and gave a lot of insight. It'd be hard to pick out one as an insight. I guess the whole thing about making the customer journey better has always been so key for me, be that better underwriting or better products or better conversation. So I guess those were the key bits for me.
A lot of the themes that we do talk about at events like ProtectX3 have been around for quite a long time. We were having conversations about the difference between price and advice 25 years ago. We were having conversations about, the list of illnesses on a critical illness policy 25 years ago and the underwriting process. And I guess the difference between then and now is the amount of technology that's available to us and perhaps the speed at which technology can move. I can remember product developments taking 2 years back at the start of my career. Even a rate cut on a term assurance could take 2 years, whereas now, and I think especially during the pandemic where we've been able to move a lot quicker, and the technology does seem to be enabling us to be a lot more nimble. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would. To be honest, technology's never really been the problem. I think it's just getting better and better and better. But I was thinking about how you might use wearables in underwriting 10 years ago. It's just now the ease at which you can extract that data. I don't know if you've tried, but you can download your health data from your iPhone and share it with somebody. So now with the kind of right support, there's no reason why people can't actually build up new propositions that make much better use of that. And it doesn't need to be expensive. I think that's the big change. Technology used to be really big projects that cost lots and lots of money. When I was at Legal General and we pushed all the term insurance online, that was millions of pounds. But it doesn't need to be that expensive now. You can get something that's very fit for purpose, in 10th, 20th of that sort of money. So it's much easier. And the technology is just getting better and better.
One of the subjects that really struck home to me and probably struck home to a lot of people at ProtectX3 was this whole subject of home working. Most of us in the financial services industry have had to work from home to a pretty much 100% degree over the last 12 months. And of course, companies have had to adapt. They've had to give people technology to put into their homes. Do you think now that this has become so ingrained and 12 months down the line, this is here to stay? Are we ever going to go back to, office working? Now, I was reading in the newspaper yesterday, some managing director or CEO of Canary Wharf says, no, we'll be back to 100% office working by the end of the year. I'm not convinced about that. What do you think?
I think everybody has really risen to the challenge that the pandemic has brought, and we should not pull back from any of that. But fundamentally, it doesn't work. And I'll give you 2 examples. My wife and I both have to homework. Now, we've got a fully decked out study, 2 screens and, the right size desk and all that sort of thing. But we have to fight over it, depending on who's got the more complicated work that day. And the other person is down on the dining room with a laptop. And I look at my daughter, through no fault of her own. She's a professional, her boyfriend's a professional. They're trying to do their jobs in a studio flat. They can't have extra screens and things, so they're both on laptops trying to find privacy for business calls. So I don't think it's sustainable as a black and white solution. I think people will want more flexibility, and like you, Roger, I've worked from home for years, but I always got out to go see people and have that sort of social interaction 2 or 3 times a week. I was able to have enough space and the right kit. I think if employers want to really facilitate home working, they've got to look at it differently. When we used to have home working years ago, you would have to go and do a health and safety assessment, and the company used to buy the extra desks and equipment. But that only works for some households. Not everybody's got that space. So I think they need to look at the processes, the technology, and how they can bring stuff together so that somebody can do their job on a laptop screen, which I don't think they can. I think if you went back to working as usual, you'd have people with 2 or 3 screens trying to read across multiple systems to get to the answer to the customer, and that's not a sustainable way of working when people are working from home.
Yeah, and Carol Bakery in her speech about home working was very clear that it's not just the environment, is it? It's the mental health of the individual as well. And I'm lucky. I live in a decent sized house. My kids have left home, so I've got bedrooms that can be turned into video studios and workspaces. I've got a nice big screen, but I imagine it can be quite frustrating. I'm thinking about maybe an underwriting assessor or a claims assessor who's got to look at one feed over here, which is a load of medical notes, and another feed over here, which might be financial information. And if before they've had all of this technology available to them, then all of a sudden they're perched on the end of a sofa with a laptop balanced on their knee, I imagine it's psychologically quite hard to work, let alone difficult from the technology point.
Yeah, no, I agree. So you'd have to completely reimagine how the workflow operates, I believe, if you really want to facilitate that longer term. I've never really felt things like a single view of the customer were that important in the past, because people don't tend to buy multiple products from one place, and it could have been a big waste of time to put all that capability in. But I think a single workflow and trying to bring in the information and the systems that people need from different places to actually be able to do it all on one device and one screen is kind of critical if people are going to be doing it when we get beyond the pandemic. I think everybody's worked incredibly hard to make it work, but I don't think it's a sustainable way of life when life gets back to normal.
Yeah, so maybe I'll have to reassess my view on what the guy from Canary Wharf said. One of the interesting pieces of work that you've recently carried out, Graham, at the data company is probably allied to what we've just been saying. Home workers are still having to deliver service not only to financial advisors but to the customers of financial services companies, protection, whatever it might be. And you've done some interesting research on the perceptions that advisors have and providers have about the service that they've been delivering during the pandemic. Could you talk us through a bit of that?
Yes, of course. I don't think what we found out was a surprise, but it introduced an interesting sort of dynamic. The insurers we talked to were generally very pleased with, and understandably pleased with, the enormous efforts they'd made to get people out of the office to home and give them equipment so they could work and try and introduce new systems or solutions to kind of compensate for the move home from office to home. The advisors who are on the receiving end recognised that effort and were pleased and relieved that it had been made, but were saying the day-to-day practicalities were that service had deteriorated, not through anybody's fault, but if people are trying to manage across multiple systems, they can't always get the information they want first time. When you're trying to escalate to your boss or to a colleague, you're often having to drop off calls or get people to phone somebody else or somebody else to phone them. You haven't got that seamless transfer around the business. And just generally, it was costing advisors more to kind of shore up the gaps that the insurers had created by what they'd had to do.
One of the themes that was running through pretty much all the talks at ProtectX3 was the language of protection. Sarah Moore talked very passionately about how we talk about it, the words that we use. Jitin Vasani and Anna Glod as well talked about when the conversation about protection happens. Does it happen when you're buying a house, when you're taking out a mortgage, or is it more appropriate to talk about it elsewhere? I've been fascinated about the language of protection throughout my entire involvement. I always like to think about simplicity of language, and I know that we don't always get it right and we don't always get it simple. But what are your views about the language of protection and some of the things that we should be trying to change? And maybe that's backed up by some of the data that you've got as well.
The key thing for me that frustrates me about the industry is that protection still seems to be a one-off sale. That you kind of try and find a customer when they might have a need, and that's why so much still pivots around the mortgage, and then delude them with products, and then it kind of all goes away again. And some of the stuff Jitten was talking about, about managing cash in and cash out, I thought was really interesting, because what we should be trying to do is create a series of cash flows for people that help them replace the income they would get if the worst would happen, be that the long-term ill or unfortunately die, so that the aspirations they have for their family can still be met. And yet we talk about lump sums rather than kind of those income flows. And we try and, lots of people try and see it as kind of a one-off. If you go and buy 20 times your salary, that's kind of you done. And I just don't think that's the way it is now. And so we need tools to help people, A, understand how they should build up their life cover or the different types of life cover, and then B, how to vary life cover as their circumstances change. So I think there should be an annual conversation that says, this is what you told us last time, this is why you needed these cash flows. What's changed in your world? And so how do we need to change those cash flows to match that? And again, technology can play an enormous part in that. You can make most of that information available to people electronically, and then it's just when they actually want to execute that you might need to speak to somebody.
Yeah, it's always baffled me to a certain extent how we encourage people to buy 25-year and 40-year policies, whereas the majority of things that we interact with in the world these days are 2 years at max, aren't they? Your iPhone contract is probably 2 years, and most people scramble to change that. My broadband came up recently. I think that was an 18-month contract, and of course I wanted to move to a better deal if I could. And yet with protection, we have this constant look at the long term. And yes, there are underwriting reasons for that, and health and age and that sort of thing. But 25, 40 years is a long time now when everything else is so short term, which is why I agree with you. I think that despite the length of the policies, I do think we need to have an biannual conversation just to make sure that everything's in place. And that's the time when we should be refining the language that we use and making it more of a general conversation rather than tagging it onto a mortgage or tagging it onto a lifestyle event that might have taken place.
I agree. And I think now I've agonised long and hard over the whole mortgage conversation. I ran a major mortgage distribution business at one time. But I just feel that the customer is so overwhelmed by everything else. I'm trying to move house at the moment, and it's a particular nightmare with all the other things that are going on. But are you really mentally ready to then have a conversation about protection as well? And even more so, are you ready to divert enough budgets to spend on that when that ultimately affects what size house you can get or whether you can have it in the road you want to live in? So it's a conflicting time to be having those conversations. But equally, people should, taking on a major debt, they should kind of have some protection against that debt. But I always thought if you could just very cheaply deal with the immediate and then have the conversation with people when they've got used to living in the house, got the bills under control, you'd probably get a better long-term result for them than, it's going to force down their throat and 6 months later they're not sure whether they still want it.
Yeah, maybe it is some sort of underwriting later type of approach we need for the mortgage. Now, Ian Sawyer from Assured Futures. I love the topic of his talk. He gave us basically 3 dreams that he has. I have a dream about the future of the protection market. Maybe it'd be a nice way to bring our conversation to a close today, Graham, to you tell us your dream for the protection market and what you'd like to see happen maybe once the pandemic's over.
I guess my dream would be to get to a point where people actually understood what protection could do for them. And all the myths of what you could and couldn't do disappeared, and people felt comfortable making sensible purchases. And I'm just surprised all the time by the naivety that's out there. You know, I was talking to a couple the other day, and I said, well, even if you just got some joint family income benefit, that would mean if something happened to one of you, that there'd be something to help. And the girl said, but we're not married, so we can't have a joint life policy. And, you know, it's those sorts of beliefs that kind of get in the way of people walking towards the industry. So, yeah, I guess it's about making it more accessible, getting the stage where people understand it and want it, and then making sure that as an industry we don't abuse that and they get great value products that do what they're meant to do.
Yeah, I think education, financial education, has come up many times before, both at protection review conferences and other industry conferences. Well, Graham, thank you so much for joining us today on this special extra video following ProtectX3. Thanks for all that you're doing at the data company. Thanks for joining us. And if you enjoyed this special episode, maybe carry on the conversation on Twitter. Don't forget you can use the hashtag ProtectX2021. That's still working. It's still trending. So please do use that hashtag and let's carry on the conversation. Graham, thank you so much once again for joining us today.
Thank you, Roger.